Our speaker this evening really needs no introduction to our DFO members, as he's given numerous programs at our meetings throughout the years. Ted's the editor of the Birding Magazine, which is an award-winning flagship publication of the American Birding Association. He's written 5 bird books, including The Smithsonian Field Guide to the Birds of North America, published in 2005, and How to Know the Birds, published by the National Geographic in 2019. He has a new book coming out, the National Geographic Field Guide to the Birds of the United States and Canada, East, second edition, which is due out in February of this coming year, 2025. Ted is also the author of more than 200 popular articles, technical papers, and book chapters on birds and nature. He's a frequent speaker at birding festivals and ornithological conferences worldwide. Ted has a bachelor's degree from Princeton, and his PhD is from Penn State. He's taught biology, math, and statistics to everyone from second graders to advanced graduate students. In 2022, Ted received the American Birding Association Award for Distinguished Service. Ted, we're so pleased to have you as our speaker tonight.
All righty. Thank you, Bill, and hello, everybody. All righty. So we are going to be talking about the state of birding, version 2024.9. My name is Ted Floyd. If you all have somehow missed the memo, this is a DFO monthly meeting, and today is Monday, 23rd, 2024. Again, thanks so much for having me this evening. Always exciting to get to talk to folks at Denver Field Ornithologists. I do want to say just a few words about our sponsors. One of them, of course, is DFO. It is possible, because DFO makes these member meetings available to everybody. You don't have to be a member to come to these meetings, that there may be somebody here who is not a member of Denver Field Ornithologists. I urge you to remedy that deficiency in your life before the presentation. No, after the present. Listen to the presentation, then remedy that deficiency in your life. But DFO is just one of my favorite bird organizations. There's so many of them out there, and they're all wonderful. But DFO, I think, is just so distinctive for having been around forever. It's actually a lot older than I think anybody in this Zoom room is. It goes back a long time. But it also has sort of both feet firmly planted in the present and even in the future. And it's just wonderful to see how DFO is a leader and also sort of a spokesperson for the contemporary birding and field ornithology community here in Colorado. I would be remiss if I did not mention my employer, the American Birding Association. ABA and DFO are not, formally or officially colleagues, but we're really sort of I don't know, we're soulmates, we're kindred spirits. I think that the ABA, which is, by the way, is not nearly as old as DFO, it's only 56 years old. Very much like DFO, certainly has its traditions, but I think is really made some very commendable and really powerful sort of shifts into the present and really sort of anticipating the future as well. So again, after the presentation, please don't do this while I'm talking, but after the presentation, consider, if you are for some reason not an ABA member, joining the ABA. Finally, because Chuck Huntermark came on moments ago, I know that I would never hear the end of it if I didn't make a plug for Colorado Field Ornithologists. Sorry, that looks sort of blurry to me. Chuck, I desperately grabbed that icon actually as you were speaking, but CFO, DFO, ABA, with its 3-letter acronyms, we're all in this thing together, and CFO is, as Chuck alluded to, a marvelous organization. Chuck has to be sort of modest because it would be vulgar if he were to toot CFO's horn too broadly, but CFO is a group that I really got involved with almost the day I got here, way back in the spring of 2022, and have been involved with ever since. So if you were to do nothing else in your life than join DFO, ABA, and CFO, your life would be complete indeed. All right, with those commercial announcements out of the way, let us talk about birding at the present time. Birding in the year 2024, and 0.9 means the month of September. And I mentioned that today is September 23rd. And let's talk about actually the experience of birding on September 23rd, 2024. And I'll start off with an image from today. That's my friend Susan Ringowen, who's one of the really active birders here in the Lafayette area. And you can tell that she's bird watching there. And this image is from just a few hours ago, actually. And we're going to be talking about sort of what Susan's up to and what I'm up to, and I think what you all are up to as well. So Bill encouraged me to think outside the box a little bit, maybe push some envelopes, push some, take us outside our comfort level. And Bill, I'm going to take you at your word on that one. And I will be editorializing from time to time in here. I'm also of the belief, though, that we can all be friends, and that life is sort of better when a whole bunch of people have differences of opinion from time to time. I actually I still have a friend who is as different from me as possible. He and I agree on nothing. And he once told me that if two people thought the same things, one of them would be redundant. So we don't want redundancy. We want a variety of opinions out here. And I'm going to proffer a few opinions as we go along. I speak on behalf of myself, not on behalf necessarily of anybody else whom I am affiliated with, but I just wanted to get that out of the way. I will be editorializing, and we're all friends. All right. So there's Susan. If you know Greenlee Wildlife Preserve in Lafayette, you probably recognize that she is sort of at the base of the wildlife observation deck there, and she's looking at a bird. I'm sure that her picture was a lot better than the one I'm about to show you all here because I was standing behind her. But she was looking at this little Wilson's warbler here in the shrubbery, and I'm going to proffer my first opinion here, my first editorializing. This is not a 5-star photo. It's not a 4-star photo. It's not even a 3-star photo. I'm sure that Susan did get a really good photo of this bird. I think it's a good photo. I think it captures the experience of experiencing, observing, appreciating, wondering about a Wilson's warbler, just a tiny, dinky little yellow bird with a black cap, olive back, bright yellow underparts, that beady eye, a little bit of a yellow above the eye there. To me, this is sort of the experience of watching a Wilson's warbler. And we're going to actually spend a fair bit of time talking about the Wilson's warbler today, because I think that the Wilson's warbler is sort of a birder's bird. They are everywhere right now. If you're anywhere in the sort of I-25 corridor, at least, up to Casper and down to, I don't really know what happens south of Trinidad, but basically, from all the way up Wyoming and all the way down Colorado, there are Wilson's warblers everywhere. It is just a really, really, really common bird. But it's really one that I think you sort of have to be a bird watcher to become aware of. And we're going to dwell on that point a little bit further on here. But what I want to do now, because Bill wanted me to talk about the state of birding in the year 2024, in particular in September, and super in particular on September 23rd, is I want to take an extremely quick journey spanning more than 40 years of my experiences with the Wilson's warbler. Yeah, so I clearly remember my first Wilson's warbler. It was on Saturday, May 21st, 1983, so 41 and a half years ago. It was around 8:15 in the morning, and I was at a Beechwood Farms Nature Preserve up in northern Allegheny, sort of north central Allegheny County, just north of Pittsburgh. And if there are any Pittsburghers out there, and I can't actually see who's in the audience anymore, the person who showed me the warbler was Joyce Hoffman, and she got me right on the bird. And I remember she told me exactly how to identify it. She said it's a yellow bird with a black cap. What could possibly go wrong? It's a really cool, straightforward identification. By the way, I also think it's so cool that Joyce, 41 and a half years ago, took the time to show me when what was I, sophomore, freshman. I know I was a youngin in high school, and Joyce took me aside and showed me my first Wilson's warbler. And 41 and a half years later, I remember that as plain as day. So back in the day, back in 1983, I wrote everything down. I was a habitual keeper of field notes, and I actually I'm going to show you in a moment here. I described the Wilson's warbler here because I had this little personal discipline that anytime I saw a new bird, a life bird, I wanted to write down a description of it just to sort of convince myself I really had seen the bird. So here's my field notebook from May of 1983. It's probably sort of hard for you all to see it here, but let me go to the parts that are relevant there. That's my description of my life bird, Wilson's warbler, at Beechwood Farms on March 21st. And I noted that I saw a round black cap on a yellow head, yellow undersides. I said olive brown upper parts. I would probably say olive green now, but good enough. That's what I thought that I saw at the time. It's always cloudy and murky and sort of brown in Pittsburgh, so it probably looked olive brown, actually. But I think it's really, really cool that this is my my field notebook from 41 years ago, and this is the way that I engaged this bird. I said that I saw a little yellow bird with a black cap, yellow underparts, and an olive-colored back. And Wilson's warblers in 1983 look exactly the same as Wilson's warblers in 2024, more than 41 years later. But I think that our engagement of Wilson's warblers has changed a fair bit, and we're going to talk about that right now. So if you look right above that entry for the Wilson's warbler, you see a bird called the hooded warbler. And at the time, back in 1983, we thought that hooded warblers and Wilson's warblers were closely related to each other. They were both in the genus Wilsonia, but we've since learned that that's all wrong. The genus Wilsonia has been I don't know, put on probation or something. It's been discontinued. The hooded warbler has been moved over to the genus Setophaga with like yellow rumped and pine warbler and birds like that. And then the Wilson's warbler has been moved over to a genus called Cardellana. The Canada warbler here in the United States is in that genus. So is the red-faced warbler. And what's really cool is that some Mexican birds, the red-faced warbler and the red warbler and the pink-headed warbler also are in that genus. And it turns out that the Wilson's warbler's closest relative is not the Canada warbler. It's actually those very reddish-colored warblers like the red-faced warbler and the red warbler and the pink-headed warbler. I just think that's really neat. And perhaps just in the United States, that seems exotic and implausible, but it actually makes all the sense in the world. The birds are shaped the same. They behave the same. Some, but not all of their vocalizations are similar. Details of their breeding biology are quite similar. And up here in Colorado, we only have the one, the Wilson's warbler. But this Wilson's warbler, the one that we saw a moment ago, is going to be heading down to Mexico right now, where it's going to be spending the next many months actually in the company of these red-colored Mexican warblers, which are its closest relatives. So a totally different understanding of who this bird's closest relatives are right now. It's got a very superficial appearance in terms of its plumage to the hooded warbler, especially the female hooded warbler, but it's much more similar to these reddish warblers. And that's something that we did not know in 1983. Here's something else that we didn't know. I'm going to show you another picture of our warbler from today. So this is the exact same warbler that Susan got me onto, this Wilson's warbler right here. And this is a view obviously from behind, the so-called dorsal aspect, as we say. If you look at the bird's crown, you can say that it's not exactly that smooth black cap or the round crown, or however I put it in my 1983 journal. It's actually sort of mottled or sort of imperfect there. And it turns out that Wilson's warblers, instead of just sort of being olive capped if you're a young female or black capped if you're a male, sort of run the gamut from every color imaginable. And actually some very old females will have caps almost this black, just with a few flecks of yellow coming in. And some of the younger males will have almost no black color at all to speak of. So that bird sure looked like an adult male to me when we saw it in that earlier and sort of more distant image from just a moment there ago here. I'm not really sure what this bird is. It's certainly a Wilson's warbler. My guess is it's a male, but it could be a really old female or sort of a youngish male, not a very young male, but a youngish male. And this idea that males and females and young and old are sort of not so discreetly pigeonholable, as I think we thought in the 1980s, also has really informed our way of engaging birds and nature around us. There's just so much variety, so much variability, and I think that's also a new way that folks are really engaging birds and nature in the 2020s. However, there's a situation here, which is that here in Lafayette, where I live, or in Denver, where many of you all are, or really anywhere else in the I-25 sort of urban corridor, you don't see a lot of Wilson's warblers in September. And that's because they're small, they're secretive, they're furtive, they hide in dense vegetation, they don't get up on perches, they're certainly not singing at this time of the year. You're just not too likely to see a Wilson's warbler. You're much more likely to hear them. Well, they don't sing at this time of the year, they call. They give this little call note, just sort of a little nasal note here. And once you know that call note, there are Wilson's warblers everywhere. And if you don't know that call note, there aren't very many Wilson's warblers out there. And I want to explore that matter just a little bit here. So earlier today, I recorded a Wilson's warbler. This is a Wilson's warbler from Greenlee Wildlife Preserve this morning. And you can see on the spectrogram here that I created sort of two kinds of information. The top is called the sound spectrogram. It's basically a musical score of the bird showing the frequency in kilohertz. So basically the pitch of the bird on the on the vertical axis, and time in seconds going from 0 to 10 seconds across the horizontal axis. So it's just like a musical score showing the sound of the bird. So you get that, and then at 2.2 seconds, you get another, then right after 5 seconds, and then sort of 6.3 seconds, 7.1, just under 8, and a little bit before 10. And then the lower figure shows how much sound energy is being produced by the warbler. And you can see those spikes corresponding to the sound energy being produced by each of the 6 vocalizations that are present here. Okay. In all honesty, everything I said might be just sort of mumbo jumbo, because really? You can tell that this is a Wilson's warbler? How does that work? We're going to get into that. So we're going to take a look at these three calls here in the 6, 7, and 8 second range because they're particularly loud. You can see that with the amount of sound energy coming in, what we call the oscillogram or the waveform function in the lower panel over there. And we're going to take a more detailed look now at those three calls there. So here they are again. This is the exact same figure from earlier, but we've gone in to see more detail on this bird right now. And what I want to bring to your attention, all three of these are basically the same call here. But if we look at the one over on the right there, so at the, what is that, like the 6.35 second mark there, you can see that it's coming in at what we call a fundamental frequency of 3 kilohertz. So this tells us what sort of the basic sound of the bird is. 3 kilohertz is well, very high pitched for a human. No human can sing that high, but actually fairly low pitched for a bird, and has that upside down U shape. So an upside down U at 3 kilohertz. This is a technical detail, but we'll come back to it. It has a little bit of a tail dangling down from the right hand part of that upside down U. You can also see that the same U shape is stacked up above it. Oops, I went the wrong way. There's a stack, another stack, another stack, another stack, another stack, and another stack. So when we have U-shaped sounds starting at around 3 kilohertz and stacking all the way up to at least around 10 kilohertz, that tells us that we have a very nasal call note, sort of an eh or an ink or an ank, like it has an N or an M sound to it. And there's something else here too. In the oscillogram, we see that it starts off with a sudden burst of sound energy and that sort of trails off. And that makes it sound like a consonant. So we have a nasal sort of sh, sh sound. And you can actually tell that from the sound spectrogram, which is really, really cool. And by the way, this is just something that I rigged up on my computer while I was in between other errands this afternoon here. This type of learning, this type of knowledge, this level of engagement is something that I don't want to say couldn't have imagined in the 1980s, but that I sure would have been incredibly excited to learn would ever be the case. I knew about the technology of spectrograms, but I never could have imagined they would one day be accessible to ordinary birders with nothing more than basic, computer equipment, but that is the nature of the beast with the Wilson's warbler. All right, get some hot tea here. We have just engaged the Wilson's warbler from the perspective of a birder in the year 2024, talking about variation of the bird, its relationship, for example, to the red-faced warbler, the fact that it spends much of its life in Mexico, especially in West Mexico. We've looked at spectrograms and oscillograms of the bird's vocalization. But Bill asked me, perhaps against his better judgment and against my better judgment too, to talk about the matter of birds named for people. So I'm going to do that right now because the Wilson's warbler is named for Alexander Wilson. And I'm going to share a few thoughts about the practice of and the advisability of naming birds after people. I understand that this is a fraught matter, although I do not necessarily speak in my present capacity for the ABA and for the National Geographic Society. I know that their thoughts are not too dissimilar from my own. Let's take a look first at our eponym here. Alexander Wilson himself, the father of American ornithology. As people for whom birds are named, he's not a particularly bad guy. From what I can gather, he was a pretty good guy. There's really nothing wrong with Alexander Wilson at all. Maybe we'll find a skeleton in his closet in due course, but Alexander Wilson is, in general, a very well-regarded sort of immortal figure in not only American ornithology, but really in world ornithology. So what about naming things after Alexander Wilson? Well, I think it's a great idea. One of the most prestigious ornithological journals of all time was named for Alexander Wilson. A very prestigious ornithological society based in the United States was named after Alexander Wilson. I think that's great. I think Wilson has gotten his due for ornithological societies. But I'm not really sure what it accomplishes to name Wilson for a bird. To name a bird after Wilson. Now, I'm not an absolutist in this matter. If there's somebody out there who is very closely associated with a particular bird, I think I could get that. The song sparrow, the bird we currently call the song sparrow, it's actually gone by other names in the past, but now we call it the song sparrow, was legendarily and famously and critically importantly studied during the mid-20th century by Margaret Morse Nice, one of the greatest ethologists or animal behaviorists of all time. If somebody proposed to rename the song sparrow Nice's sparrow, I guess I'd be okay with that. I mean, the name is so strongly associated with the song sparrow. Actually, Rachel Carson in The American Robin Silent Spring is based as much on the American robin as on any other organism. And a lot of our sort of present day environmental ethic did come from Rachel Carson's work on American robins on the college campus where she was doing some research at the time. So yeah, I could actually see that in the case of the renaming the robin of all things, or renaming the song sparrow, two very, very familiar birds. I just don't think that Wilson's warbler conveys information about the name Wilson's warbler conveys information about the bird called the Wilson's warbler. So I would be in favor of a different name, not out of any disrespect, not out of any sort of I don't know, consigning to the dustbin of history of Alexander Wilson. I think that it is entirely appropriate for Wilson to be commemorated within the field of ornithology, not necessarily, though, for all the rest of us. This is kind of personal for me. I lived in Philadelphia way back when. And in fact, I lived in the part of Philadelphia where Alexander Wilson was most active. And the elementary school in my neighborhood was called Alexander Wilson Elementary School. It's actually been converted to something else right now. I believe it's a property of the University of Pennsylvania where I used to work. But I was intrigued to see that it was Alexander Wilson, and I actually got talking to folks in the community. None of them knew who Alexander Wilson was. Like I said, do you know who Alexander Wilson is? And they took some guesses that were completely wrong. And I guess that's what it gets at my point that I'm just not convinced that that name Alexander Wilson is nearly as prominent out there as we imagine it is. I don't think that just slapping the name of a bird like Wilson on the Wilson's warbler accomplishes that. Put Alexander Wilson on a coin. I think that'd be awesome. Put him on a bill. I think that would be great. Write more biographies about Wilson. Have a museum devoted to Wilson, and indeed name organizations and awards and journals after Alexander Wilson. But in terms of getting people fired up about birds, I would recommend a different name for the Wilson's warbler. So that's my personal take on patronyms. I think that the people who were significantly contributing to ornithology. For the most part, in the 19th century, there's some 18th century and also some 20th century names in there, very much deserve our study and our awareness and also our critical evaluation as well. Some of them actually are bad guys and bad gals, mostly bad guys. But I just don't see the utility in naming birds after people. All righty. Now that I've gotten that out of the way, let's move on to some other matters, which is the case of birding today. Hey, something that I should have done at the very, very beginning, Bill, and I forgot to do this. I did want to say that I was going to come up for air from time to time and answer questions if there were any. And Bill, from what I gather, you are monitoring the chat. So let's go. I don't just want to catch anybody by surprise right here, but let's move on a little bit here. And after a few more slides, I'm going to see if there are any questions in the chat. So folks, you can put questions in the chat now. You don't have to wait until the very, very end. But let's move along now from the Wilson's warbler to some of the other birds that were at Greenlee Wildlife Preserve. I said this morning, but really this afternoon. There are hummingbirds still hanging out at Greenlee Wildlife Preserve. This is a black-chinned hummingbird. There are a couple of them still hanging out at the preserve, and this is a broad-tailed hummingbird. A couple things to note here. The first is that there are any black-chinned hummingbirds, that was the previous image, at all in Lafayette and indeed in Boulder County. That bird is a new addition to the avifauna of Boulder County. When I got here, when I got to Boulder about 22 and a half years ago, black-chinned hummingbird, like a good bird. You didn't expect to see black-chinned hummingbirds. It had never been documented as a breeder. It was just sort of like an uncommon, I wouldn't call it a vagrant, but sort of just a stray or a wanderer to Boulder. Black-chinned hummingbird, and again, just to be clear, that's this bird, not this bird, just wasn't really in Boulder County. It's now a prolific breeder, especially in the lowlands east of the foothills in Boulder County. So along with birds like, the bush tit, notably, and some other birds, Buick's wren, this bird is sort of generally just moving north and establishing new habitats and new regions as Colorado gets warmer and drier. As to our broad-tailed hummingbird here, what's interesting about the broad-tailed hummingbird, although its range is not changing, its migratory strategy is changing. It's arriving earlier and earlier every year. The first returns now are in March, and it's returning later and later. The broad-tailed hummingbird is a very hardy bird. They routinely survive nights in mid-spring in Rocky Mountain National Park, when the temperature's down to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. They can that's fine with them. And as the climate gets warmer, they're getting back earlier and earlier, and they're leaving later and later. So the black-chinned hummingbird is occupying a new range in Colorado. The broad-tailed hummingbird has a new migratory strategy. This is not the way bird watching used to be. Hummingbirds are changing. They look the same as they used to. If we were giving this talk in the 1980s or the 1990s, we would put up similar images, but the story of their ecology, especially their sort of spatial ecology, when and where they occur, has changed in just the 22 years that I have been in Colorado. I also want to point out on this image of a broad-tailed hummingbird here that I guess I'm old enough that it amazes me that a bird watcher can obtain images like this at all. I just did this with a point and shoot camera. The setup at Greenlee Preserve is nice. You can get fairly close to the hummingbirds there, but you don't really need special gear to get perfectly good, I mean, feather detail photos, in this case of a broad-tailed hummingbird. That is something that certainly did not exist for us not too long ago at all. Well, there were other birds at Greenlee Preserve this morning. For example, this rose-breasted grosbeak. At least I think it's a rose-breasted grosbeak. The top of the bill is a little on the dark and smudgy side, and that could indicate maybe like a great-grandparent or a great-great-grandparent who was a black-headed grosbeak. But being aware of the extent of really the pervasiveness of hybridization, and here most of all, really perhaps in Colorado more than almost anywhere in the ABA area, but also parts of the Canadian Rockies, parts of British Columbia, for example. We have so many hybrid birds here, and we see a bird like this presumptive rose-breasted grosbeak. We do have to sort of worry about or wonder about the possibility of a hybridization. Gary Strelo, if you're out there, this bird is on its way to Los Magos in Costa Rica in a few, actually it's on its way there right now. It'll probably be down there in a month. So Gary asked me if there was any possible way that I would remotely allude to or advert to Los Magos. And there you have it. This bird, this rose-breasted grosbeak, is on its way to Los Magos. And that's not an entirely gratuitous remark for Gary. It also just goes to show that the bigger picture, the entire life history, the entire natural history of birds is, I think, something that we're a lot, I think, better plugged into than we ever have been before. I think there was this idea, I mean, sad to say really, that, you know, our birds are here during the summer months, and they just sort of go into some like holding pattern or black hole or a bin or something somewhere, you know, down there. And it's really gratifying to me that that outlook on an attitude toward birds is no longer the case here. Gary and others will be seeing rose-breasted grosbeaks in Los Magos and elsewhere in Costa Rica, and for that matter, elsewhere in Middle America. Quite soon, actually. They're on their way, Gary. All righty. In addition to this rose-breasted grosbeak, there were familiar birds like this red-winged blackbird this morning, but a sort of unusual looking red-winged blackbird. Look at all those rusty edges to the feathers. What's wrong with this red-winged blackbird? There's nothing wrong with this red-winged blackbird at all. This is a male red-winged blackbird, and this is what they do when they go into their what we call their pre-basic or their annual fall molt. The males acquire these very striking sort of rusty fringes to a lot the feathers on the upper parts, also on the finer fringing on the breast and on the throat as well. And it's actually the same sort of fringing, although more extensively, that's shown by the rusty blackbird. So the red-winged blackbird does the same thing as the rusty blackbird. It acquires this very rusty plumage in the fall, which will sort of gradually wear down or wear off or break off during the spring. And then by next spring, when all those rusty edges are gone, it will sort of be the classic red-winged blackbird that we see, you know, singing from cattail marshes. But this is a totally normal red-winged blackbird. And I have to confess, like, I don't exactly know what had happened, but I don't think for maybe my first 20 years as a bird watcher that I really realized that it's a totally normal thing for red-winged blackbirds to be rusty red-winged blackbirds during the fall and into the early winter. Okay, I'm going to shift gears now as we talk about some of the other birds that were out there this morning. But actually, at this point, Bill, I will ask if there are any questions in the chat. I'd be happy to entertain them now if you think that's appropriate, but I could also wait until the end. I hear no questions. Oh, or maybe I do. No, I don't. Okay, so we're going to move right along here. And
Actually do, Ted. Sorry, this is Sharon.
Oh, hi, Sharon. Okay.
Does the Wilson's warbler have any historical common names that would take precedence if
Yeah.
renamed?
Yeah,
if
thanks.
not, what names have been bouncing around?
Yeah, that's
in your circles?
that's a really good question. So I wish I feel bad that I don't know the answer to this. I'm almost certain that the answer is yes. And the reason I say that is because the Wilson's warbler comprises three distinctive populations or subspecies groups, and they have received English names throughout the years. So I think it's quite likely that pre-existing names do exist, and they would enjoy priority or sort of like privilege if that is the case. A name I do hear from time to time, it's funny, one name is black-capped warbler. I'm not hugely in favor of that because there are other black-capped warblers. Another one I hear from time to time is willow warbler, but that's a bit of sort of Yankee centrism there. There is a bird in Europe called, in fact, the willow warbler. It's not one of our warblers, but it lives in willows. I like the intention behind willow warbler because, as anybody who's ever spent any amount of time in the high country in Colorado knows, they are legion in our willow cars. I mean, anywhere above about 8,000 feet in Colorado, you can't not detect Wilson's warblers all summer long. So yeah, great question. I don't know for sure if there is a pre-existing name. I strongly suspect that there is one, and I don't know what it is. Hey, let me say one other thing about Alexander Wilson. I'm not aware of any particular association between Wilson and the Wilson's warbler. I might be wrong about that. Maybe he wrote the defining monograph about Wilson's warbler in the 1830s or something like that. I kind of don't think that that's the case, though. There's nothing particularly Wilsonian about the Wilson's warbler. Incidentally, poor Alexander Wilson, the genus name Wilsonia was in fact named for Wilson, but that name has been demoted, as I said earlier, for just reasons of sort of a nomenclatural rules and regulations. The name had to be gotten rid of because it turned out that the bird is more closely related to those Cardellina warblers from Mexico. So, thanks, Sharon. Any other questions? Or
Nope, that's it.
okay, super. Okay, well, we'll take another break at some point before we're done and entertain more questions. Okay, so we have a red-winged blackbird in front of us right here, and now we're going to take a look at, well, what is this? This is a bird that was out at Greenlee Preserve this morning. If you are a reader of spectrograms, it's clearly saying, "Weep, weep, weep." Yeah, so this is the rising vocalization of one of our spotted towhees. The spotted towhee gives this rising call note, and it's a loud and distinctive call note. And this is really, really intriguing to me because the spotted towhees in Colorado, the breeding spotted towhees, supposedly all belong to a subspecies called montanus. And montanus, our birds certainly look like montanus. It's supposed to have a descending call note. But I have mined the eBird and, the Macaulay and the Xenocanto databases for spotted towhees in Colorado whose vocalizations are descending or just steady and level. I cannot find them. All of our birds sound like Arcticus spotted towhees from much farther north here. I don't think the towhees are doing anything wrong. I think actually we've gotten it wrong historically with regard to naming the subspecies. And I'm not trying to throw shade on our predecessors here. They didn't have access to spectrograms like this. I'm sort of being glib here, but somebody heard a few towhees in Colorado and just kind of got it wrong. That happens. Some kind of revision of our understanding of the breakpoint between Arcticus, which is the spotted towhee to our north, and then Montanus, which is the spotted towhee supposedly here in Colorado, and then also down breeding in New Mexico and Arizona, is in order. There's something wrong with our current understanding of spotted towhees, and these spectrograms showing here a clearly rising vocalization, supposedly not given by our breeders here, certainly indicates that we need to do a bit more work. Let me back up here. How do I really know that this is a spotted towhee? Okay, well, I know it sort of for the same reason I know that earlier bird was a Wilson's warbler. I've just put a lot of effort into trying to understand spectrograms, and these squiggles and sort of in conjunction with the waveform function there tell me that this is in fact a spotted towhee, which may seem like a sort of I don't know, esoteric take on spotted towhee identification, but actually this is exactly how our brains do it. We understand that our human brains, when they hear sounds, create maps that are very, very similar to what we're visualizing right here. Our brains sort of, if you will, see sound and then send sound to our sensory processing world. We hear them, of course, in our ears, or we think we're hearing them in our ears. but our brains actually are capable of this level of analysis, which I just think is so cool. I mean, we can't possibly plumb those depths, at the conscious level here. But when we look at brain imaging in humans and also in birds, we know that this is sort of the way actually that our brains are, quote unquote, seeing bird sound. And that's exactly what the Merlin Bird ID app is doing here. I ran Merlin on that spotted towhee to see if it got spotted towhee right. There it is right there. That's the spectrogram. You can see it rising right there. And Bill, just as I've gone there with the Wilson's Warbler in its name. Now I'm going to go there with the Merlin Bird ID app. It is something that everybody is talking about and everybody seems to have opinions about. And I want to address the two sort of most hardened and maybe sort of polarly opposed opinions about the Bird ID, the Merlin Bird ID app. Here goes. Number one, if you are using the Merlin Bird ID app, good for you. It's really good. It's really efficient. It's very accurate. It's getting more and more accurate. It's learning faster than humans learn. Perhaps in a few years or a decade, it will be as good as the best humans. It's not quite there yet. But use it as a tool, which is what I do all the time. You can see that the Merlin Bird ID app very usefully shows you the spectrogram there. I can tell you that that is a spotted towhee. It's not a black-capped chickadee. There was black-capped chickadee elsewhere in this this output here. It's not a red-winged blackbird. It's not even a fairly similar bird like a blue jay, the call of the blue jay or the call of a gray catbird. So if you're using the Merlin Bird ID app, trust but verify, as Carl Sagan and others used to say. Make sure that Merlin got it right. And incidentally, you would do that same thing with a field guide or an expert birder. If you looked up a bird in a field guide and got a match, you'd probably want to maybe look at it again in the field, maybe take some notes, maybe get a photo, ask a friend. Speaking of asking a friend, it's the same thing with asking experts for help with bird identification. It's great to ask somebody standing next to you what the bird is, but what if they made a mistake? Merlin makes mistakes. Field guides can lead you astray. Human beings can make mistakes. Yesterday, I had the privilege of birding with some really top-notch bird watchers in Boulder County in that sort of really driving rainstorm that we had in the morning. Great birds, by the way, out in Boulder County yesterday. But Claire Wayner and Carl Bendorf, Lori Potter, Rob Cassidy and I and others just had a wonderful time. And in complete seriousness, we probably questioned each other on half of all the birds we saw out there. It's good natured. It's fun. We're friends. It's okay to ask questions. It's okay to doubt. It's okay to be skeptical, and apply that to the Merlin Bird ID app as well. If you get an ID from the Merlin Bird ID app, that's great. It might well be right, but you need to verify that Merlin actually got it right. Merlin makes mistakes the way some of the best birders and some of the best field guides don't necessarily make mistakes, but they can lead you astray. So keep that in mind. That's audience number one. Audience number two are the people who are really opposed to Merlin Bird ID app and think nobody should use the Merlin Bird ID app. And I'm really increasingly sort of gently impatient with that audience, because I think the Merlin Bird ID app is fantastic for two reasons. The first is that it's getting really, really accurate. I think at some point we're going to cross what I like to think of the Kasparov threshold. So Gary Kasparov is perhaps the greatest chess player of all time, and certainly, I would say the most celebrated, the most colorful chess player of all time. He very, very famously played chess against computers in the 1990s. And at first, he handily beat the computers, but then the computers got pretty good. And now the computers are vastly better than Kasparov or any other human being. You can play computer chess on your cell phone now that Gary Kasparov couldn't possibly defeat. I don't know if we've gotten to that sort of like Kasparov Rubicon with the Merlin Bird ID app, but I think we're going to get there fairly soon. That can only get better. It can't get worse. And it's getting better really, really quickly. But even if it never gets to be as good as some of the best ear birders in the world, it's firing up huge numbers of birders, people who maybe otherwise wouldn't have really been interested in birds, let alone how to identify birds by sound. And I think that's great. Imagine if we got rid of field guides because, sometimes they led people astray, or imagine if we got rid of experts because sometimes experts make mistakes. And that's really the case, by the way. That wouldn't make any sense at all. So I love the Merlin Bird ID app. It's getting more and more accurate. I think it's just about as good in a particular region as the best birders in that region. And I think it has really demonstrated its ability to engage thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps, of people who otherwise would not have engaged in birds. And I think that's really cool. All right. We have looked at some birds now. We are actually now going to look at some non-birds, because I think they are also part of the story of how we engage birds in nature at the present time. Sharon or Bill, are there any questions in the chat right now?
Yeah, there are two, Ted.
Oh, okay.
The first one, this past week, Kevin Schutz observed a black vulture among a large group of turkey vultures on the ground. Initially, he discounted the bird as a juvenile TV. It wasn't until the birds flushed that the color patterns on the wings became apparent. The underwings were quite different, white fingers quite evident. Do you have any suggestions on distinguishing the differences between black vultures and juvenile TVs when on the ground or perched?
Yeah, wait till they fly away. I mean, I'm kind of serious about that. But yeah, so they are quite similar when they're on the ground. Incidentally, there was a well-watched a black vulture in Boulder County quite recently this month. It was discovered by Christian Nunes and then seen by many others. They have long, sort of sickly white legs. In communal interactions, black vultures are often much more aggressive. They're sort of more agonistic, as biologists say. They're very engaged. Turkey vultures are sort of aloof, but certainly they are most readily identified when they are. Again, we're talking about juvenile turkey vultures. The adult turkey vultures look very, very different. But yeah, I would say the best thing to do is wait for the bird to fly off. As our interlocutor has said here, they do look quite different in flight. Thank you for that. And Sharon, was there another question? Or
This one isn't a question so much as a comment.
Hmm?
Merlin is fooled by talented blue jays making
Yeah.
Cooper's hawk calls. I've heard him do red-tailed hawks as well. Merlin also called a common raven and a great horned owl done by a human being. It is a great tool, but is there anything we can do to help Merlin get better?
Yeah. Let me address the first part of the commentary there. Yes, that's true that Merlin can be confused by birds that imitate other birds. By the way, so can humans. Some of those blue jay imitations in the Front Range metro region now of Cooper's hawks, which are rapidly urbanizing, are incredibly high fidelity. Not only do they get the timbre and all of the other sort of acoustic parameters exactly right, they even sort of space it out. A blue jay will go kek, kek, kek. They do the whole Cooper's hawk thing. It absolutely fools me. So I just want to point out, I have almost daily interactions. Well, I definitely have daily interactions with blue jays and near daily interactions with Cooper's hawks. They are very, very similar. Merlin's actually better than humans because it can see some of the remember back in the Wilson's Warbler, those partials or some of the higher pitch vocalizations that our ears don't hear, they can pick up on them and tell when a bird is not the real deal. In terms of making Merlin better, yes, that's a great question and one that I can't spend that much time on. But what we need to do to make Merlin better is to upload audio that we know has been correctly identified. So be careful, please. Perhaps edited. Oh, not to change or alter the nature of the recording, but to get rid of, for example, fiddling with the gizmo at the beginning, the end, human voices at the ending or the beginning there, to really help the machine out. And then the other thing too is to report errors. If you are certain that Merlin's got it wrong, you're pointing the phone at an American robin, giving an alarm call, and it's calling a cedar waxwing. Well, it made a mistake, and you know that, and you can report that, and that'll help the machine get better and better. So I would say go out there, make recordings, be careful, and when Merlin makes mistakes, let the folks know about it.
Right.
Cool. Okay. So we've just looked at a spotted toe. We're going to look now at this. All right. So what is this? Well, sort of a giveaway here is that I've changed the x-axis. We're starting down way, actually fairly high at 3 kilohertz, going all the way up to 12 kilohertz. And this is a sound that is coming in right at 8 kilohertz. So it's very, very, very high pitched. And you can see a strong signal, especially here, sort of around 9, 10, and 11 seconds. And if we come in closer here, well, this isn't a bird at all. This is a cricket. This is Allard's ground cricket, Alonomobus allardi. The reason I'm putting this up here is because this is something that literally nobody knew in the 1980s. I shouldn't say nobody, maybe like 2 or 3 people who studied this animal knew it really, really, really well, but we had no access as popular natural historians to this kind of information right here. It had not been described. The animal had been described as science, but its vocalizations could not be presented like this. This is information now that, due to websites like Singing Insects of North America, Will Hirschberger's Singing Insects website, that we now all have access to. And the thing about the Allard's ground cricket that is so cool is that it is everywhere. In complete seriousness, if you have been outside or just had your window open anywhere in the Front Range metro region today, and by the way, if you're from farther east in the United States, also farther east in the United States, you heard possibly hundreds of Allard's ground crickets out there. They are absolutely everywhere. They start singing around 10 a.m. They go to about 10 p.m. They don't really like sort of the early morning. They like it warm, but especially on sort of nice, warm, dry days like this in Colorado, they are going on and on and on constantly. You can hear 10 or 15 or 50 of them at any given time, and nobody knows it, which is really sort of striking to me. Note, by the way, this is kind of fun that the spectrogram is very similar actually to that of the Wilson's warbler. It's got that upside down U with that little curly Q sticking down on the right hand side, but it's much higher pitch. The Wilson's warbler comes in at around 3 kilohertz. This is at 8 kilohertz, so it's more than an octave higher than the Wilson's warbler. So a very high pitched sound for sure. Good luck ever trying to see one. Like, I have heard knowingly thousands or tens of thousands of Allard's ground crickets in my life. I'm sure that before I learned what they were just a few years ago, I've heard millions of them, but you can never see them. They're tiny, they're black, they hide in the grass, and as soon as you get near them, they stop singing. They just will not let you get close to them. And that's like, it's really cool to me that like there's this animal called the Allard's ground cricket. It's everywhere. Like if you go out starting, well, if you, even at the end of the talk tonight, before about 10 p.m., just go to any grassy area. And I don't mean it has to be like native prairie. It can be a lawn or a curb or turf at a ball field. There will be Allard's crickets going off. Allard's ground crickets going off like crazy. And I just think it's really, really neat that like we just didn't know that 20 years ago, certainly 40 years ago. And now we have access to knowledge about the Allard's ground cricket. And that is true of so many other insects. Again, this is all content from today. This is a black blister beetle, Epicotta pennsylvanica, which is everywhere in Colorado right now. It especially loves goldenrod. Also, the various plants are called rabbit brush. But if you go out and find a goldenrod and maybe just shake it up a little bit to sort of shake the insects out, you will absolutely see these beautiful black blister beetles. Again, Epicotta pennsylvanica. I don't think we knew that 20 or 30 years ago. We just have knowledge about the world around us, not just birds, that is so much more detailed and exquisite than it was even recently. One more non-avian organism here. This is a plant called the, what's it called again? It's one of the gumweeds, curly something gumweed. I can't remember its name here, but that's very telling that I don't know the name, because we're going to ask our phone in a moment here what the name, curly cup gumweed, that's the name of the plant here. So I took a picture of this plant with my phone just a few hours ago, and then I asked my phone what it was, and we were informed that it's in fact the curly cup gumweed. This is an app that's very much like Merlin, but this one is designed for anything that has protoplasm. It doesn't just have to be a bird, the way that the Merlin Bird ID app, this is Seek by iNaturalist. It can identify anything, whales and slime molds, anything that's macroscopic. You know, if a camera can, a cell phone camera can see it, we know that we're looking at a curly cup gumweed here. And this is just so amazing to me here that we can take a phone out, point it to one of the DYCs, the darned yellow composites. Birders have their LBJs, their little brown jobs, botanists and horticulturists have their darned yellow composites, their DYCs, and be informed by our phone that we're looking at a curly cup gumweed. I just find that to be amazing. So there were really, really good and skilled and knowledgeable birders in the 1990s, but the idea that you can just sort of be broadly knowledgeable about everything that's out there, whether it's a blister beetle or a singing ground cricket, an Allard's ground cricket, a curly cup gumweed. And what's so, I guess, encouraging to me is that although I think iNaturalist and the Seek app have been sort of picked up by everybody, it's so great to see that the younger people, people a lot younger than I am, I think are sort of the most avid users of iNaturalist, and the engagement of people sort of college, even high school age, certainly into their 20s and 30s, just learning about everything due to the proliferation of technology that can identify it for us is just so cool. And wouldn't it be crazy if somebody told me that, oh, that Floyd, he just held his phone up to that plant to learn what its name is. But come on, I know the name of this plant now because I know its name. I'm interested in it. I care about it. I want to learn more about it. In fact, I have learned a lot about it. I didn't realize, for example, that it has figured very prominently and continues to figure prominently in indigenous medicinal practices throughout North America. That's really cool to me. The gumweed, the gummy part of it, has to do with like topical applications for skin rashes. But if I didn't know the name of it, I wouldn't even begin to know where to look for that information. So our phone has told us that we're looking at a curly cup gumweed, and I think that's cool. All right, let's start to wrap up the presentation now here and look at what we do with all of this information. So not too surprisingly, I created an eBird checklist for everything that I saw this morning. I just want to very quickly zip through here and just point out that we have notes, we have a list of birds. We have, in this case, a photo of a pied-billed grebe. Those are the hummingbirds we saw earlier, the two black-chinned hummingbirds, one of the broad-tailed hummingbirds. There's a sound spectrogram of a white-breasted nuthatch of the interior west subspecies group. Here is that spotted towhee with those rising call notes, and I even have a mildly snarky comment in there about whether it's Montanus or Arcticus. I'll let the experts figure that one out here. And then wrapping up with our what is that, red-winged blackbird, and there's an orange-crowned warbler, Wilson's warbler, and a rose-breasted grosbeak. So everything that we've taken a look at this afternoon, well, this evening, but I saw it this afternoon, is already in the eBird database for all of the world to ponder, and I hope to learn from and perhaps even enjoy. But I don't think we should pat ourselves on the back in the year 2024 all that much, because I think that the impulse to keep records like this has always been there. We didn't have eBird, we didn't have iNaturalist, we didn't have the internet and other ways of sharing these massively crowdsourced databases the way we do today. But I think that as I said, the impulse to do that has always been there. I want to share a very personal example with you about that. So today is, of course, September 23rd, 2024. I want to show you my eBird checklist, my proto-eBird checklist from exactly 40 years ago, from September 23rd, 1984, back when I was in high school. Now, they didn't have eBird back then, but they did have typewriters. In fact, they had electronic typewriters. Now, you can't see the detail on here too well, but this is a checklist that I had created for my birding purposes in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania, in the 1980s. And much like setting filters for eBird today, I created a checklist that had the most expected birds. And as you can see, I went birding on, the type is pretty small down there, but on September 23rd, 1984. So these are the birds I saw exactly 40 years ago. If there are any Pittsburghers out there, I am mortified that I misspelled Shenley Park. There's an E in Shenley Park. Somehow that escaped me on September 23rd, 1984, but I am mortified by my mistake right there. But yeah, this is what we would today call a complete eBird checklist, not with the level of detail, and I have a lot of X's in there, but all the starlings, what we used to call rock doves and other birds are in there. In my infinite free time, I suppose I could go back in and upload all of my proto eBird checklists from the 1980s. I think I have a few as early as the late 1970s, actually, but mostly starting in the 1980s like this. And, I couldn't have imagined eBird on September 23rd, 1984. I'm not sure that I could have imagined September 23rd, 2024 at all at that date. But I think that really the basic idea, just going out there, credibly documenting birds, keeping a record of it, keeping a record of everything that you see there, is something that has been set in place for us forever. I think that eBird is, and iNaturalist and other crowdsourced databases are responding to a very real need that has always been out there. I think that eBird basically is filling in a gap or a hole that just wasn't there until not all that long ago. All righty, let's finally wrap up now, though, with sort of the question of why we do any of this at all. Why do we go bird watching? What's the point of it? And I actually do think that our grasp or our understanding of it is a little bit different in the year 2024 than it might have been 20 or 40 years ago. And I'm going to try to get at that by an image from earlier today of some folks out at the preserve. You all may recognize Sheridan Simano out on the left there. She's a field trip leader with DFO, actually. And these are some of her young chargers at Peak to Peak High School in Lafayette and Boulder County. And they're creating habitat for birds. They're actually moving a brush pile from one place to another to make it more conducive for white-crowned sparrows and other birds that will be appearing quite soon here in Lafayette. And I think three really, really cool things are going on here. On the one hand, Sheridan and these high school students are doing something good for birds. I think that whether we keep checklists or restore habitat or sort of alter habitat is happening right here, or educate people or get into rehabilitation. I mean, there's so many different ways of engaging birds. I rarely find somebody who's interested in birds who isn't concerned about birds as well. So I think that the impulse to care for, protect, and ultimately do something on behalf of birds is very much there. And I see that going on here as well. Something else that's going on in this image is I guess I'm not sure how else I would put this, like a sense of community, getting together, making friends, um, um, sharing, discovering things together. I think that aspect of birding obviously always has been there, and nature study too, by the way. But I think that a sort of an explicit awareness of just how good birding is for ourselves is a fairly new one. I think that again, the wellness, the mental health, and also physical health benefits of bird watching have always been there, especially since the beginning of the pandemic. I think we understand and appreciate that better than ever. You know, I think of all the things these kids could have been doing today, including, going to school and studying calculus or something like that. And by the way, that's a very good thing to do. Like, what could possibly be better than being out there with Sheridan at Greenlee Wildlife Preserve, helping birds? I'm sure she's talking about bird biology. They're just, and even if she's not, but I know she is, they're just out there breathing fresh air and getting sunshine on their skin. And they're out there in the natural world. Like, this is good. This is healthy. This is wholesome. And I think that the wellness benefits of birding are something that they're more precious and more valuable, I think more meaningful to me, and I think to many of us than ever before. But finally, I want to say, and this is something that's just so timeless about bird watching, I don't think it requires any justification at all. Yes, being a bird watcher is good for birds, and yes, being a good bird watcher, being a bird watcher is good for our minds and our bodies. But it's also something like playing a musical instrument or becoming proficient at athletics or something like that. Like, you don't have to justify that. It's an obvious good. I think that bird watching is just a good thing. It stands by its own, all by itself. Again, like playing in a band or being on a sports team or just doing something like that. It's a good thing for us. It requires no justification. And, I realize that bird watching is not exactly in the arts. I think of the arts, I think of, the visual arts, musical arts, but it is kind of like that. It's just it's beautiful, it's wonderful. We apprehend and we perceive beauty whenever we go bird watching, and that just requires no justification. I mentioned at the outset that I sort of am happy to disagree with any of you all on almost anything. But one thing where I really do sort of find my patience wearing thin is with people who think that we shouldn't fund the arts. Like, what could be nobler than funding the arts? And I would say also funding bird watching and nature study as well. So these kids, and also Sheridan out there, they're doing good things for birds. They're doing good things for their minds and souls and hearts and bodies. And I just don't think it even requires any justification at all. But let me really end up now with a story just about myself right here. So this is an image from just moments before I got on the phone with Jim. I just raced out to Greenlee Preserve and took a picture of the preserve as the cloud cover was coming in early this evening. I love how the AI got it completely right. A path in the woods. Sometimes they give you very strange misidentifications, but this is indeed a path in the woods. This is a path at Greenlee Wildlife Preserve. And just going back to the original image here, my final image for the presentation, places like this are just so valuable and precious to me. I've been coming out here for several decades now. The number of eBird checklists is sort of so embarrassingly multitudinous that I don't even want to look it up. It's in the thousands for sure. But every day I think that Greenlee Wildlife Preserve becomes more and more special to me. It's a place that is in some ways just like many, many hundreds, probably a few thousand of other green spaces in the Denver metro area. There's so many of these places, but for those of us who come here routinely, it's as valuable as anything I think that we can imagine. I mean, I want to say it's as valuable as our health. It's as valuable as our sense of wellness and well-being, and that's because it informs and nurtures and promotes our well-being and our sense of wellness. Without Greenlee Wildlife Preserve, those of us who come here all the time would have our lives very greatly diminished. And that's absolutely the case, by the way, for those of you all who have other patches or special places like that as well. I think that we go to places like Greenlee Wildlife Preserve more than ever. We're aware of how the simple act of stepping into a preserve, noting what we see, sharing the sightings with others is good for bird watchers. It's good for birds. Ultimately, it's very, very good for ourselves. And I don't think it really even requires any justification. I think it is just self-evident that places like this are good. Going out to places like this are very, very good. And my take on birding in 2024, so Bill, this is birding 2024 or V20 2024.9 is that I think we're in as good a place as sort of hopeful a place, as happy a place as we ever have been. I get it that the world around us can be tumultuous and uncertain. We've got that election coming up fairly soon, and I get that that is a source of tension and friction and stress for a great many of us, and just other things going on in the world for sure. But as long as there are birds and as long as there are bird watchers, I see those as hopeful and very salutary developments for all of humanity. I like to say that if everybody in the world were a birder, I think the world would be a really, really, really good place. So I'll leave you all with that charge. I think we've learned so much more about birds at the present time than we've known. I think that we engage birds and nature sort of more holistically and more intelligently than we ever have before. And I think that we realize that being bird watchers, being nature lovers is more valuable and more precious than it ever has been before. I see that it is now 8:07 p.m. I wanted to finish by 8 o'clock. So I'm going to stop talking right now, but I will ask, and thank you for your attention and bid you good night, but I'll also ask Sharon or Bill if there are questions in the chat room now.
Let's see. I'm not seeing a question, but a couple of follow-up comments.
Great.
That are great to share. One is that Merlin prompts you to enter the correct bird ID if it gets it wrong, and that's in the app at the end. So that's a good tip.
Yep.
And then a couple other historic names for Wilson's warbler.
Oh, good. Here we go.
Black-capped warbler.
Right. Yeah, that's one I wondered about. Yeah.
Pileolated warbler.
Yeah. So that refers to one of the there are three subspecies of groups. So Pileolata is one of the three groups. That would be fine. That's, to me, pileated is sort of a funny sounding word. I would prefer black-capped to pileolated, but yeah. All right.
And then those come from the volume called Obsolete English Names of North American Birds and Their Modern Equivalents by Richard C. Banks.
Yep. Oh, Dick, sure. Yeah. Yeah, so the late Dick Banks was one of the he was a long-term chair of the checklist committee, the AOS, and now then the AOU checklist committee. But Pileolata is not exactly a like a defunct name. It's certainly preserved now in the scientific literature. So
yeah, and there is one question here.
Oh, good.
The great horned owls on the east side of Winnetka were very vocal last night.
They sure were. I know.
At this time of year.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure who said that or where that person was, but yeah, right around this, actually about an hour earlier, right around 7:15 last night. So what we were hearing there was actually two females quarreling with each other. One of the females last night was giving that ooh, 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 call note, and then actually, I'm not a female. It was a young bird giving that quack call, but the young female gives that more than the young male does. Yeah, so I noticed that they were just actually were on they were on my street. Actually, they were on a Salinas street giving some really, really cool sounds. Yeah, so this is the courtship season for great horned owls. Great horned owls court earlier than any other bird in on average than any other bird in Colorado. Birds are pairing up right now, and two females were going at it last night on the west side of Wanaka Lake. I can't resist. Who pointed that out? I'm just curious.
Oh, I have gone and deleted it
from
that's
fine.
the list.
That's no problem. Okay.
I think it was, I'm sorry, I'll just say the wrong name if I guess.
That's fine.
No anyway.
Okay. Well, whoever you were, identify yourself to me later, because I heard that too. I almost tried to work that into the presentation somehow, but I couldn't think of a way to do it. But thank you for being a shill in the audience and mentioning it. But yeah, that was really an impressive show that those female great horned owls were giving last night.
That was Mark Wilson.
Oh, well, that makes sense. I see Mark Wilson here from time to time. Excellent. Good. Hi, Mark. All right.